We can now bring in Ori Goldberg, an Israeli political commentator who joins us from Tel Aviv. Thank you very much for joining us here on France 24. Now, last night, as we were just mentioning, the Hamas agreed to the ceasefire agreement proposed by Egypt and Qatar. It came a few hours after, of course, parts of Rafah got an evacuation order by the IDF for this so-called limited scope operation. Is this Israeli government on the cusp of accepting any ceasefire agreement?
I would carefully suggest that it is. And my reason for suggesting this have to do with two main factors. The first is the lack of resistance that Israel met in its storming into Rafah. Israel has not been fighting in Rafah, so this isn't quite an offensive. Hamas has made its strategic decision. It has agreed to a deal. It has offered a way to a deal. The way, as reports are suggesting, is not very different from things Israel has agreed to previously. The second reason I think this is a production aimed mostly at domestic consumption is that while all the words are seemingly said, this is very much what Israel has done in past wars when it was on the verge of signing an agreement imposed on it by the international community. Whenever this happens, Israel wants to appear as though it has gotten everything it can, that it has operated to the max. And by entering Rafah, Netanyahu will be able to tell his base and the right-wing elements of his government that he was true to his word, that he operated in Rafah. There is no other place to go in the Gaza Strip. And once that happens, I think he would probably be capable of acknowledging the pressure that is being applied to Israel by the United States, Saudi Arabia, and pretty much everybody else in the world. And ultimately, after seeming reluctant and postponing it and procrastinating it, and unfortunately killing quite a few more Palestinians, ultimately, over the next few days, Israel will sign the deal, I think.
So you're talking about the lack of resistance from Hamas. Do you have any idea what a ceasefire agreement Israel could potentially agree to? Because one of the sticking blocks was a full withdrawal.
I think the main stumbling block at the moment is an Israeli commitment to end the war. I think both Egypt and Qatar and the United States are doing everything they can to convince Hamas that once Israel commits to a limited ceasefire, a renewal of the war is not likely. And while, of course, I agree with your correspondent who described Netanyahu's domestic political pressures, I think that once there is a change in, pardon the word, a change in the vibe, then I think it will have its own momentum. I remember what Israel was like when there was a 2-week ceasefire. The difference was palpable. If there's going to be a 4-month ceasefire or a 2-month ceasefire, I have no doubt that political processes will be set in motion that will ultimately see the demise of Netanyahu's government.
I want to ask you about Netanyahu's future because he, of course, his two stated objectives in this war since the 7th of October has been first to get the hostages home and to destroy Hamas. He's not managed to do either 7 months on. So what has this operation achieved so far? We have nearly 35,000 Palestinians killed, according to the Pentagon. A majority of those are women and children. So what has realistically been achieved here?
Nothing has been realistically achieved here. This operation has only had negative effects, obviously on the Gazans, as you've just described, but also on Israel. Israel has more than 100,000 Israelis displaced internally. Israel's borders are no more. Israel has lost the support of the world and is quickly becoming a pariah state. Nothing has been achieved in this operation. The problem is that as long as the operation is presented as a war for the defense of Israel, even those who are flocking to the streets to demonstrate against Netanyahu, the majority of them are not calling for an end to the war. They're not criticizing the way he has run this war. They're criticizing him personally. They're aware of his flaws, but they're not, most of them are not calling for an end to the war.
How would you explain that?
I think it's rallying around the flag. I think for Israelis, issues of national security, quote unquote, are sacrosanct. And at heart, I think a lot of Israelis, even though who heartily dislike Netanyahu, I would say the great majority of the Jewish public, support this war because a lot of Israelis operate with the systemic dehumanization of Palestinians that is part and parcel of Israeli citizenship and Israeli public life. What Netanyahu has done is take this to the outermost limit, but still, most Israelis, even though they will not be comfortable with it, even though they will have perhaps something to say about Netanyahu, ultimately, they will not be able to offer any other choice. In Israel, national defense still consists of destroying Palestinian property and killing Palestinians. That's the most tangible proof a prime minister can offer for his commitment to national security. Sadly, most Israelis still think that's the case. And sadly, they don't think that this war, and not even the way it has been managed, is wrong. Only when that happens will there be real public pressure. I am somewhat optimistic right now because I think in a lot of ways this has effectively been taken out of Netanyahu's hands. He has no more room to maneuver. He has no physical space in which to advance. There is no more Gaza Strip. If he starts pushing refugees into Egypt, which Egypt, I think, is clearly showing it is not willing to receive, then he will be not just defying the world, but openly looking to start a war. As your correspondent said, Netanyahu is known for his reticence in situations like this. And while he has led the spilling of an unbelievable amount of innocent Palestinian blood, I doubt he is willing or prepared to start a war that has these consequences for Israel.
But Netanyahu is also ultimately looking for his own political survival. I heard in the early days of the war somebody out on the streets of Israel who said that if he doesn't step down, he will be physically removed. 7 months on, he has not shown any willingness to step down, and he doesn't have a plan for what comes after, whether it be a two-state solution like the United States wants to see happen.
On the other hand, you can also say that he has not been physically removed. Even though there have been mass demonstrations against him, they have not resulted in the sort of pressure that ultimately removes a leader in office. So what Netanyahu is doing is trying. Can you hear me? What Netanyahu is doing is trying, as he has always done, to play both ends against the middle to ensure his personal survival. The problem is the stakes are getting very high. His own personal safety is at stake here because of potential arrest warrants by the International Criminal Court. I think this is being made clear to him by the Biden administration, but also by his friends in the United Arab Emirates, in Saudi Arabia, in those illiberal pockets of the EU like Hungary. I think these people are calling him now and they are telling him that he has probably reached the end of the line. Should he decide to go through what's called the Samson option, to pull down the tempo on everybody, that's always there. But if you think about Netanyahu's record, if you think about the way Netanyahu has functioned in situations like this, that's not what he does. Ultimately, after paying way too high a price at the worst time, in the worst possible fashion, he steps down. I don't know if he'll resign, but it should be enough that his government enter into a meaningful negotiation and ultimately, again, after 3 or 4 days of reluctance, sign a deal. That would be enough for major systemic change in Israel. I'd also like to remind you of one fact. On Monday and Tuesday, Israel will celebrate its Independence Day. That's a national holiday. It's very solemn. Netanyahu is flirting with domestic disaster if he doesn't enter these holidays with some sort of stabilization. If he continues to pursue chaos, I think he knows that in one way or another, he's done for.
We'll see how it pans out. Ori Goldberg, thank you very much for joining us on the program today.